There has been increasing tensions between India and China, and it has a technological edge. This week, India banned 59 apps originating from China, including the hugely popular social media app TikTok. Joining us here to explain whether Australia or other countries should be concerned is from Information Security Media Group, Jeremy Kirk, and journalist and audio producer Olivia Roseman. So, Jeremy, I'll start with you. Exactly what has happened?
Appears to be kind of a tit for tat that's based on the military confrontation. And what India said, it banned these apps, and particularly TikTok, because it presented basically a national security concern. So it said that TikTok was sending information and data to overseas servers, and presumably TikTok servers are in China. And so that's the rationale it gave. But it seems clearly linked to this really barbed conflict in the Himalayas.
Is there any actual truth to India's claims, or is it all political posturing?
You know, China has come under a lot of criticism in Chinese companies such as Huawei because of China's law that requires technology companies to share data with the government. And so that's the reason why, you know, the Australian government has banned Huawei. Other countries around the world have done that too, because they're afraid that it could potentially pose a national security concern. So while this may be kind of short-term political maneuvering, there's also very much a long-term concern with Chinese companies and the applications that they make and the relationship with its own intelligence agencies.
The list of apps that they've got there, some of them will confess I'm not super familiar with, but there's some big names in there like WeChat, Weibo, like they're reasonably well-known apps in there, Jeremy.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even if you look at sort of TikTok's user base, I think at least a third of the users are in India. So as far as a way of retaliation and retaliating, you know, against a very popular tech company, it's probably is going to send a message. Now, whether it will kind of last, you know, a lot of countries do sort of engage in these short-term sort of moves and allow apps and then ban them again. So we'll have to see if this one's actually going to stick.
Should we be taking these claims seriously of the Chinese government accessing the data in these apps? I mean, whether or not Australia wants to ban the apps, and I kind of doubt our government would make a move like that. But absolutely, I think we should take it seriously. I think in all likelihood, the Chinese government is accessing the data in those apps. WeChat, certainly. TikTok, I mean, this is part of the modus operandi of the way that these media and tech companies work in China. That they do have to share it. So, yeah, I think if you're using those apps, be aware that in all likelihood that is happening.
Actually, on that, Olivia, I mean, you've lived and worked in China for some period of time, yes, from memory?
Yes, that's true. 6 years in total. My experience living in China and working with Chinese friends and colleagues was that they were incredibly aware of the fact that any communication they sent through one of these apps was 100% something that they needed to consider very carefully and not write something that might be considered, you know, not okay by the Chinese government. So I don't really know if it was sort of a routine handing over or if there were keyword searches, but certainly that was something that I was aware that everyone was aware of, that they would not be writing something that could potentially get them into trouble, no matter it being on a closed messaging or within a kind of a friend network.
How much do we know about what access do these companies give to Chinese security services?
Well, I would assume that they have absolutely full access. And this kind of goes into, you know, the discussions that we've had about encryption too. I mean, unless the messages that you're writing are end-to-end encrypted, meaning that only you and the recipient can open them, it's kind of an open book, really. And it's also important to realize that if you're not using end-to-end encryption, even if you're in a Western country, if there's a court-ordered warrant to get that information, it can be turned over. So while what China has perhaps is more permissive, this is the reality is if you're using an app, if you're submitting personal data, there is a risk that other people may be able to access it.
Are there examples of apps that you can point to that are end-to-end encrypted that it would be very hard for a third party to access?
Yeah, absolutely. You can look to Facebook's WhatsApp, so that's end-to-end encrypted, and we know that the kind of Five Eyes countries, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and on want to get access to that for law enforcement purposes. And so there's a lot of moves to actually enshrine in law access to those communications. And Australia also has this, sort of anti-encryption bill as well. So unless the content is protected, it's best to run on the assumption that anybody might be able to get access to this and read it.
Also, Facebook message chat is now also encrypted. But something I noticed, I was actually living in Hong Kong in 2014 in the Umbrella Revolution, and there was an app that a lot of the protesters were using there that was an encrypted service that also destroyed the messages straight away. And I've just forgotten the name. Firedor? FireChat. That's right. Yeah, so that was definitely one of the messaging platforms of choice of those protesters because precisely that, it was encrypted and self-destructive.
There is lots more of this in the podcast. To download this show, you can get it wherever you podcast, and we will catch you there. Bye, guys.